Great. Welcome, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Anthony James, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Marriage and Family Review. Welcome to today's episode of The Editor is In. Today, we are talking about the value of being a reviewer. To introduce herself, let me pass the virtual mic to my guest.
Hi, my name is Pam King, and I am on the faculty of the School of Psychology and Marriage and Family Therapy at a very unusual place called Fuller Theological Seminary, which initially started as a seminary educating clergy, and we were the first accredited school of psychology that happens to be part of a faith-based university, so to speak. And I affiliate as a developmental psychologist.
Yes, absolutely. And would you mind sharing your editing background with our guests or with our audience? Sorry.
Sure. So Anthony, I have had the privilege, and I will say the burden of editing. I think I've edited 4 or 5 special issues from everything from Journal of Research on Adolescence, New Directions for Child and Adolescent Development, Applied Developmental Science, and the British Journal of Development, something close to that. In addition, I have edited the Handbook of Child and Adolescent Spiritual and Religious Development with SAGE. So those are all various larger projects that I have served as an editor on.
Absolutely. And so let's get started. I have provided a list of 5 questions that will guide our discussion. And I have provided these to our guests. So we'll go through them one by one. And of course, the first question is, what is the value of reviewing from the perspective of the scholar? I do want to acknowledge that, yes, as an editor, and we definitely see the value of reviewing because this creates a pool of individuals who can review the papers submitted to the various outlets, in my case, Marriage and Family Review. But can you give us your perspective on why you see reviewing as a valuable thing to the scholar?
Yes. So I think it's immensely valuable. I think it's not only a huge contribution to the field, and obviously so much of the academic world hinges on the peer review process, which is really important for us putting forward new, rigorous science. I think the review process is extremely valuable for the reviewer in terms of being exposed to different perspectives. I have always benefited from reading what is cutting edge and new and emerging research, and understanding how people are answering questions from different theoretical backgrounds and also from different methodologies. And I have learned so much about emerging methodologies actually through my reviewing process. And one of the things that I super appreciate about the peer review process is the opportunity as either the author to receive different expertise as feedback. And I also love, and I think as a younger reviewer, I felt like I had to know everything. And I have so appreciated as I've matured in the field to realize, like, as a reviewer, I can really offer up my expertise. And I do not have to worry that I have to know everything about the piece I'm reviewing, and trust the editor and the editorial process to select editors and other reviewers that will complement my knowledge and expertise. So I love actually learning from the other reviewers who might be commenting more deeply on areas of project that I am less qualified to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a process that many editors use, including myself, where we target certain individuals with certain skills to provide their perspective. And occasionally you'll see reviewers say, well, I'm not sure so much about this because I don't understand the statistical method, but I can talk about, where it fits in the skill, fits into the larger literature. So I appreciate you for sharing that. So what are some ways that a given scholar's training impact the extent to which they may review for academic journals? Have any thoughts on that?
Yes. Can I clarify? To the extent or like the means by which they may review?
Both, actually, I think would provide some value. So yeah, if you want to maybe give a thoughts on both.
Sure. So I think training greatly impacts like the theoretical lens that you'll bring to a review. One of my areas of expertise that has developed over time is in the area of religious and spiritual development, or religious, I guess, psychology of religion and spirituality. And I have found that this topic of religiousness and spirituality might actually be studied across many different social science disciplines, whether it be family studies, emerging adult studies, more other developmental, personality and social psych, cultural psychology. And I often am requested to review pieces that may not be in my bullseye of expertise in terms of being a developmental psychologist, but I assume that I'm being asked to comment on the theoretical perspectives of religiousness and spirituality, whether it's family, culture, different ages of the lifespan, personality, etc. So I think our training in specialized areas gives us particular lenses that can bring rigor and insight and wisdom to particular subjects or topics, theories within the piece. And obviously developmental expertise is also bring helpful perspective. For example, I love exemplar methods or exemplarity research. There's not many of us that do that work, but I've been well trained by Bill Damon in that. And so that's another thing I will review on. I might not be an expert in what the exemplars are exemplifying, but I know more about some of the strengths and the pitfalls of that method. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that, because previous guests on this particular program have talked about it, and I think that may be, my doing in terms of how the question is asked, in terms of like your one-to-one relationship with your mentor and the extent to which they may encourage or discourage you from being a reviewer. But it sounds like what you're saying is even sort of schools of thought, or I shouldn't say we all know. I think many of us identify some programs that have strengths in certain areas. I mean, just as an example, in like economics, you have the Chicago School, or I know at University of Missouri, HDFS, we were a little stronger on family related research, especially divorce and step families, as I went through there. And then you have, some places like, say, Kansas State HDFS that I think they focus more on marriage and family therapy and, the finances. And so that is a different, that's sort of a different level in terms of a department sort of expertise or thing. So, and if I'm not understanding that correctly, please correct me, but it seems like that's the way you were going in that.
Yes. But let me speak to what I guess you were asking that I didn't understand. So many of my mentors have been pioneers in the field and have edited, historically edited very seminal, important volumes. So as a developmentalist, both Bill Damon and Richard Lerner have been editors of the Handbook of Child Psychology, or later known as the Handbook of Child Psychology and Developmental Science, and have edited been editors of Developmental Psychology or New Directions, many different important journals as well. So I've always had that as an example. And that is a way that one helps not curate, like we talk about in social media, like pick what you want to have represent the field, but really bring expertise and rigor to ensure that the field is continuing to evolve and develop, become more rigorous, have more differentiated science, etc. So that's always been an explicit, I think, expectation. So perhaps that's why I didn't even hear that in your question, because it's just been part of the air that I've breathed as an academic.
And I appreciate you sharing it, because it just opens up a different area to think about. I mean, the hope is that we're sharing this with, department scholars in our field that are interested in reviewing. And so that just brings a different perspective for what are the various developmental pathways into which people become reviewers, because anytime you do editing, you have to identify reviewers. And I think all of us who've done this, at least twice, know that there are certain people we can count on, and they probably have a different thinking about reviewing that may not even be known outside of folks who, I know I get personal notes from editors like, hey, can you do this? And then I just sent, because I had a manuscript that had two separate, review scores. And I said, I'm going to in the middle here, let me send it out to one more person to get a different, perspective. And so all of those things I think are part of this process. And so I know I appreciate you for sharing that perspective. So having said that, do you have any thoughts on, developmentally, how does someone become a good reviewer? So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Definitely. I have some strong thoughts on that. Many of us, for part of our doctoral candidacy, we have to submit publications. And I can remember doing that as a very early, not even pre-emerging academic. And the reviews I got back, I actually found extremely helpful. So I had a very positive first experience. That piece did end up getting published, so that's a good memory. I guess I had a good attachment experience to reviewers early on, just to put that in a developmental framework.
Well
and
said.
also how it was very helpful and constructive, and to get two different reviewers. So being an author and experiencing that is very helpful. And I think also developmentally, I can remember some of the first times where I disagreed with the reviewers, and being able to push back and explain and articulate to the editor, like, actually, I don't agree with this reviewer for this reason, was really helpful for me to differentiate my voice, my perspective. I also think I have not done this. I have aspired to do this, but I have not. I have a colleague who co-reviews with his graduate students. So if he is asked to do a review, he will ask one of his graduate students who's aligned to also participate in the review process as an opportunity to groom and train and equip an emerging scholar as a reviewer. So I think that's very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a few people talk about that process. I've done that on a few times, because as we in this field know that as you get promoted and go up, the service work gets heavy and you just don't have as much time. So you have to have these sort of generative processes to help the field, but also help your students to make sure you're still in it. And it's multi-layered for sure.
It is multi-layered for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure.
So, okay. So our next question is: Are there any barriers that you see to becoming reviewers based on issues of diversity?
This is a fascinating question. I thought a lot about that, which honestly triggered me to think about, like, how colonized is the review process? Is very interesting. I think I have thought about it historically as a democratic process of having different perspectives. But then I thought about, like, this is an exceedingly Western process of having an individual paper reviewed by usually anonymous individual voices. And, you and I have done some editorial work around It Takes a Village. And so I started to think, in preparing for our time, like, wow, what if we had a more communal orientation towards the review process? One of my areas of expertise is human thriving, and what looks at what goes right with young people or adults, not just looking at the problems. Our review process is absolutely problem focused. But what if we had a process where, heaven forbid, like the least favorite academic word in the world, committee, or how about a review community, came around an author for a review process that was, I don't know, we need to think about the anonymity issue, but thought, how can we make this paper better? Or how can we bring all our expertise and not tear it apart, but build it up? And how can we build up the author as a person and a scholar at the same time, where it's a very depersonalized process? And perhaps the journal we're reviewing or constructing or supporting for, or scaffolding for, is not the right home for it. But part of our review process is not to say it's not worthy of our journal, but to say this would be a home that's a good fit, where this scholarship could thrive and take on a greater life. It's not a great fit with our journal for whatever reason.
Hey, that's certainly a new idea. You're putting some things in the atmosphere that may come into promise. I do know one outlet, and I reviewed for them recently, Frontier. So I'll share that.
Mhm.
That and I asked them about this when they sent me the paper, and I actually reviewed this with one of my mentees, and I said, "Hey, I think you sent me the wrong draft. I see the authors." And they said, "No, we decided some time ago, I don't recall how long, that we would just be open with it." And so it ended up being a process where the authors would respond in the system to one of my suggestions, and then I would get an email alert that I can go in and say, "Oh, yes, no," or that satisfies what I was thinking. And it does take a different view. Of course, we have some very strong feelings about, blind reviews and what that means. And so certainly there's some things to be worked out if we're going to transform the whole field in this way. But I think you're hitting on something, especially if we're thinking about how do we strengthen papers. If the idea is, what's moving the literature, what's creating the generation of knowledge, and
exactly.
we certainly want to make sure we're keeping those things in mind. So yeah.
And I think, we are in an era where it is on the academy to uplift, support, and amplify voices of less represented populations in the academy. And, within social sciences, both of us know that most of the samples, most of the studies are done on, types that look more like me. Or types that are educated both like us. And so how do we scaffold studies, authors, scholars that might be more poised to elevate the lived experiences of populations that are less studied? And how do we amplify voices that have more sensitivity to contextual diversity, cultural, racial, socioeconomic, etc. And I think I'm sure somebody could put together a very interesting study somewhere of even looking at the diversity of different reviewers and how that might impact what actually is published or not. And so I think that's something we should take into consideration. I think in this era of more intentionality around issues of DEI, I don't know if editors are looking for culturally diverse voices or perspectives in the review process. I have not edited anything in major. The more active review process was JRA, which came out in 2019. So that was previous. And one of the things I love about the topic I study of religiosity is it lends itself to diversity and diverse populations.
Absolutely.
Those
are, yeah, I know that some editors and publishers are looking at these things closely, encouraging editors to consider, the composition of their editorial board, what areas of expertise are covered, and just a whole range of characteristics, human characteristics that, allow you to provide better reviews. I think that's the overarching goal. At least that's my hope, and that's what I try to think of as I'm making these decisions. So absolutely.
And I just think that this era calls us to consider what is a better outcome. We often assume that better, at one point in time was, a higher p-value or a lower p-value, forgive me, or the larger sample or more years of longitudinal research. But I think we're in an era where better really needs to be redefined in terms of our top tier journals, the things that become most influential. I also think, I take such great heart and I'm so inspired by the Academy, by so many of the societies that I affiliate with, of really taking on issues around injustice, etc. But the review process is so unique in that it's blind. So there's less explicit accountability to how areas of diversity are being considered. And I don't know if there's processes of just like we have a lot of transparency in our data collection and our research design, does there need to be some transparency and eventual accountability regarding our current review processes? These are things I haven't thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we have the session here, and hopefully, that this becomes part of the conversation. Okay, our last question. So should editors give young scholars a chance to review, which I think you've already touched on, maybe multiple chances? How do they do this? Just what are your thoughts on how do we facilitate that generativity of, mentoring people into the field of reviewing, through reviewing, I should say.
No, I think that's so important because I think I study adolescence, but I think the younger people in society play such a prophetic and important role for helping us attune to what is new and what is needed and what should be. But I think a really helpful way is to co-review, as I talked about. I also think freeing up younger reviewers to really focus on and bring their expertise to a certain area so they don't feel overwhelmed or incompetent that like, oh gosh, I'm not qualified to comment on all of this. I wish editors, when I was a younger reviewer, said, hey, we really want you to focus on this. Don't worry about hierarchical linear regressions, as if those were even available when I was a younger reviewer. We didn't have those then. But just to free up younger reviewers to have more effective and successful experiences. And I think also, I even think we should teach it in grad school. Maybe programs do, but we have not. Where really fascinating, one of my favorite things as a reviewer is to get back the other reviews. Because I'll be like, I wasn't really sure what to do with this. I can't wait to see what reviewer A and B said on that. But if you had a classroom where we could actually, go through that process and see how different reviewers, I think that would be a helpful way to help train and build up some reviewing strengths and expectations for reviewing and familiarity with it for younger reviewers.
You mentioned something we talked before the session started about Mark Fine is my mentor, and one of the things he did in our most senior research methods course was he spoke with a journal editor who allowed the class, now these were smaller classes at that point, maybe no more than 10 students, to review a manuscript. And of course, Mark would write the final comments, and it became one of the reviews for that paper, which was a learning process. You got to sort of see how your colleagues looked at papers, and just the many ways in which scholars how they key in on certain things, and you really sort of learn the process. And so I certainly thought that was valuable, a valuable process, learning process for me, and helping me, be encouraged to do more reviewing moving forward. So I appreciate you sharing that. And so sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
One other thought. So I was just thinking, in my experience as an author over the years, reviewers have bedside manner. I never thought about this. Maybe we call it margin manner. But just as some doctors can be more caring and compassionate and supportive in their delivery of good or bad, medical news, I think reviewers also have a margin manner or a bedside manner. And I think that's creates a tone of the academy of a supportive environment, a gatekeeping, judgmental environment, an inclusive environment. And I think that's something that as mentors teach younger reviewers or equip younger reviewers, that's something to attune to, and that this can be an opportunity for teaching and frame it in a more positive experience than necessarily a judgmental one.
No, absolutely. I think you're correct. In fact, we have a joke about it, a reviewer two, right? We don't want to be reviewer two type of idea. And over, I think the holiday break this past year, I was reviewing a paper, and I think I may have even posted this online. I think I did, where I added some language for at the bottom, because I know that what I was suggesting was probably going to be harsh to the author, but I was suggesting it hopefully to improve, strengthen the argument they were making. And I added a note at the end that, hey, please don't take my words as negative. I'm really trying to be supportive here, and want to make sure that your work is received and strengthened. And so, and I hope that, of course, it was blind, so I don't know these individuals. Sometimes you're able to sort of figure out who's the voice, but I didn't know this one. But I can recall receiving some of those negative reviews and how it's just crushing. And so why would I want to contribute to that?
Right. Why do I want to be in that scholar? Process?
Exactly. And so I hope that small note, which I've tried to include, and I don't get a chance to do many reviews. I'm mostly making editorial decisions. I have to read all those papers that come into the journal, but it did help me, I hope, be a little more generative and watch my language, because those things can build you up or tear you down. So so I appreciate it. Thanks so much for answering the questions. I would like to give you a chance to have any final thoughts for our audience, if you would like, if you have any.
One final thought is that, we all have strengths in the academic world. We do so many things, and some people are really naturally good reviewers. Some people are great editors. One of my weakest links as an academic is I'm a very slow reader. So reviewing and editing is really laborious and draining for me. I do it because I care about bringing my expertise and wanting to build up the field in those areas, but I can't do as much as I might like because it just takes so much effort. So I think, freeing up people or reviewers in a way to bring what they can bring and make it as easy as possible for them to contribute, that's a helpful word for editors. So we can continue to have reviewers and diverse voices, and yeah, it's an honor to be a part of it, and it's all a lot of work. And thank you for what you do as an editor and as a reviewer and author scholar.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your insights, and hopefully, this is helpful to others and in their journey to being in this world and being a reviewer and being a scholar. So thank you so much for joining us.
My privilege. Thanks, Anthony.
And to the audience, you've been listening to The Editor's End with our special guest, Dr. Pamela King, and yours truly, Anthony James. Today's podcast will be available on our website, where you also find a short bio on Dr. King and a link to her website. So check us out, and we will post this. Of course, you're free to share it on the various social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Please like and share, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.